started with a phone call late one evening, one I wasn't supposed to hear. I had just finished fixing the leaky kitchen faucet. One of the many things Emily insisted I get to before the weekend. She was in the living room, sprawled out on the couch with a glass of wine, her phone in hand. Nothing unusual, except her voice was quieter than normal. Whispery, almost conspiratorial. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" I heard her ask. I froze mid-step, the wrench still in my hand. I wasn't eavesdropping, at least that's what I told myself. But something in her tone made me pause. No, Jason won't come. He's not the jealous type," she added with a soft laugh. One that didn't belong to me. Jealous type? That wasn't a term she'd ever used to describe me. I wasn't sure if it was meant as a compliment or a jab. I leaned against the wall, pretending to inspect the light switch as her words trickled through. "Sarah's wedding is the perfect excuse. No one will suspect a thing." Her voice dipped lower, but not low enough. Ich bring it. Of course. "Stop worrying, Derek." Derek. That name hit me like a fist to the chest. My hands tightened around the wrench as I tried to steady myself. She hung up before I could hear more, but it was enough. I walked into the room, still holding the wrench. "Everything okay?" I asked casually, though I could feel the heat rising in my neck. She jumped, clutching her phone like I'd caught her mid-crime. "Oh, Jason, you scared me." Her cheeks were flushed, but she recovered quickly, sliding her phone onto the coffee table. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just talking to Sarah about her wedding plans." "Sarah's wedding plans?" I repeated, my voice calm. Too calm. "Yeah." She smiled, taking a long sip of her wine. "She's stressing out as usual. You know how she gets." I nodded, my mind racing. The pieces weren't adding up, and I knew I wasn't going to get anything out of her tonight. Not yet. That night I barely slept. My mind was a storm of questions. Who was Derek to her now? Why was she lying about a phone call? And why did my wife sound like she was planning something behind my back? The wrench was still on the nightstand when I finally drifted off, and I wasn't sure which one of us was more dangerous at that moment. Me or the truth I was about to uncover. The next morning, Emily was up before me. That alone was unusual. She was never a morning person. I found her in the guest bedroom with her suitcase open on the bed, neatly folded dresses, shoes, and makeup bags lined up with military precision. She was humming softly to herself, something she only did when she was very pleased with herself. I leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're packing already? The wedding's not until Saturday." She didn't even look up, her hands busy tucking an expensive-looking perfume bottle into her bag. "I'm leaving early tomorrow morning. Sarah wants help setting up the decorations, and it's a 3-hour drive to the venue." That should have made sense. It really should have. But the air between us felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. Why didn't Sarah ask me to come? I mean, I could help. I pushed off the doorframe, stepping into the room. Emily finally looked at me, her smile razor thin. "Jason, you hate weddings. You always find an excuse to leave early. And you're terrible at small talk." She laughed lightly, but it felt rehearsed. "Besides, it's going to be a girl's thing until the ceremony. Sarah doesn't need you sulking around while we're blowing up balloons and putting together flower arrangements." "Blowing up balloons?" I raised an eyebrow. I thought this was a classy wedding. She rolled her eyes and turned back to her suitcase. "You know what I mean." Her casual dismissal stung, but it wasn't just her words that got to me. It was her tone. The way she spoke to me like I was a child asking too many questions. "Who else is going early?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She froze for half a second, so quickly I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching her like a hawk. "Just Sarah, me, and a couple of the bridesmaids," she said, zipping up the suitcase. "Why are you so interested all of a sudden? You've never cared about these things before." I shrugged, trying to seem indifferent. "Just curious. You're going to be gone all weekend, after all." Emily walked past me, patting my chest with a patronizing smile. "Don't worry, honey. You'll survive without me for a couple of days." That should have been the end of the conversation, but as she left the room, I noticed something sticking out of the corner of her suitcase. A small black box. My chest tightened as I walked over and pulled it out. A set of brand new lingerie, delicate lace and satin, tags still attached. I stood there, staring at it like it might explode in my hands. Emily had never worn anything like this for me, not even on our honeymoon. And now she was taking it to help Sarah with decorations? When she came back into the room and saw me holding it, her face didn't even flinch. "Oh, that," she said casually. "Sarah asked me to bring it for a bachelorette prank. It's for one of the bridesmaids." I stared at her, waiting for a flicker of guilt, a crack in her perfect facade. But she didn't break. She just smirked and snatched the box from my hands, tossing it back into her suitcase. "You're so nosy sometimes," she teased, brushing past me. It was such a blatant, obvious lie, but she delivered it with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. That smirk burned itself into my brain as I watched her walk away. That's when I decided I wasn't going to sit back and wait for answers. Whatever was going on, I was going to find out. And if Emily thought she could keep me in the dark, she was about to find out just how wrong she was that I couldn't shake the image of that black box, the lie rolling off her tongue so easily, and that infuriating smirk. Something wasn't right, and every instinct I had screamed at me to dig deeper. Emily had been careful, too careful. But nobody's perfect. The next morning, she left early, just as planned. I kissed her goodbye, acting like the doting husband I was supposed to be. As her car disappeared down the street, I immediately went to work. First, I grabbed her laptop. Emily wasn't great with technology. Her passwords were laughably predictable. Sure enough, her Facebook, email, and even her online shopping accounts were all variations of our wedding date. I scanned her recent messages and emails but found nothing unusual. She was smart. If something was going on, she wasn't going to leave a trail I could easily follow. Then it hit me, the GPS. Emily's car had one of those built-in navigation systems that saved recent destinations. She rarely used it, claiming her phone was easier, but I knew better. She used the car's GPS all the time when she didn't want me seeing her phone screen. I ran out to the garage, my heart pounding. The car still smelled faintly of her perfume, a cruel reminder of how perfectly she masked her secrets. I climbed into the driver's seat and pulled up the recent destinations. There it was. 2 addresses popped up from the past few days. One was the venue for Sarah's wedding. No surprise there. But the second, I didn't recognize it. It was in a completely different direction, 2 towns over, and it had been entered just yesterday. A dry cleaner? No. A coffee shop? Nope. It was a residential address. My stomach churned. What the hell was she doing at some random house the day before a wedding? And why hadn't she mentioned it? I copied the address into my phone and debated what to do next. Emily wouldn't be home for hours, maybe even days. I had the time, but did I have the guts? I thought about it for all of 5 minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. The drive took a little over an hour, giving me too much time to second-guess myself. But when I finally pulled up to the address, my heart dropped into my stomach. It was a modest house, neat and unassuming. Parked in the driveway was a car I hadn't seen in years. A silver sedan with a distinct scratch on the driver's side door. Derek's car. The bastard hadn't even bothered to park it out of sight. I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles white as rage boiled in my veins. Why the hell was Emily at Derek's house? This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. I didn't have a plan, just adrenaline and anger fueling me. But before I could do anything stupid, I noticed the blinds in the front window shift slightly. Someone was watching me. I backed the car down the street and parked out of sight, my pulse racing. I wasn't ready for a confrontation yet, not without proof. But one thing was clear. Emily was lying, and Derek was somehow involved. I pulled out my phone and searched for a nearby coffee shop. If I was going to stay on her trail, I needed caffeine and a plan. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't just about Sarah's wedding. This went deeper, and I was about to find out just how far Emily had gone to cover her tracks. I parked my car a few blocks from Derek's house, sitting low in the seat with my coffee in hand. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slow, my eyes locked on the driveway. Derek's car hadn't moved. Neither had the blinds. Emily had told me she was going straight to Sarah's. That was a 3-hour drive northeast. Derek's house was 2 hours southwest. She'd lied, boldly, confidently, and for what? A rush of headlights snapped me out of my thoughts. A black SUV turned onto the quiet street and rolled up to Derek's house. My heart pounded as I recognized the driver's profile. Emily. She stepped out of the car wearing that damn dress. The one she'd packed so carefully the night before. Tight, flattering, completely inappropriate for decorating a wedding venue. She had a large tote bag slung over her shoulder, and as she walked to the door, Derek opened it, grinning like he'd won the lottery. I watched, helpless and boiling with rage, as he leaned in and kissed her cheek. She didn't flinch. She didn't push him away. She smiled, stepping inside like she belonged there. The door closed, and the house swallowed her whole. The rage I felt was unlike anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. She wasn't even trying to hide it. I wanted to storm up to that door, kick it open, and drag her out by the lies she'd been living. But something held me back. I needed more than this. If I confronted her now, she'd twist it, call me paranoid, claim it was nothing. No, I needed undeniable proof. I called an old friend of mine, Mark, who ran a security company. Mark owed me a favor after I'd helped him rebuild his deck last summer, and I wasn't above cashing it in. Hey Mark, weird question, but how fast can you get me a listening device? A what? He sounded half asleep. Jason, what the hell are you? Don't ask questions. Just tell me if you can do it. He sighed, muttering something about me being insane. I can have one to you by tonight. But seriously, man, are you sure about this? You're crossing a line here. Mark. The line was crossed the second my wife walked into her ex's house like she owns it. Just get me the device. By the time Mark arrived, Emily had been inside Derek's house for over 2 hours. My patience was wearing thin. I told Mark what was going on, just the basics, and handed him cash before he could lecture me further. The device was simple. A tiny bug I could plant near the front door. It wouldn't pick up everything, but it would catch enough to paint a picture. Mark helped me install it, though he didn't hide how uncomfortable he was. Jason, you're playing with fire here. If she catches you, she won't. I snapped, my eyes fixed on the house. By the time we finished, the street was pitch dark. Emily's car was still in the driveway, and the lights inside the house were dimmed. What the hell were they doing in there? I drove home on autopilot, my hands shaking on the wheel. The recorder linked to my phone, and I kept it open, listening for any sound. At first, there was only silence. Then muffled laughter. Hers. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, while rising in my throat. Then, I heard Derek's voice, low and smug. You think he suspects anything? Emily's laughter was soft, almost mocking. Jason? Please. He's clueless. He trusts me too much to even question it. The words hit me like a gut punch. My entire body went cold. I slammed my fist against the dashboard, rage and heartbreak colliding in my chest. Clueless? She thought I was clueless? Well, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. I barely slept that night. Emily's voice played on a loop in my head, taunting me with her cruel, smug laughter. Clueless. He trusts me too much. By the time morning came, I was already pacing the living room, my mind a storm of plans and emotions. She thought I trusted her. She thought I was too blind to see what was happening right under my nose. But now I had an edge, her own arrogance. At 10 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was her. Hey, Jason, she chirped, her voice sweet as syrup. I'm so sorry I didn't call last night. We were up late decorating, and I crashed as soon as I got to the hotel. Hotel, right? Don't worry about it, I said, forcing my voice to sound calm. How's Sarah holding up? Oh, she's a wreck. Emily laughed lightly. You know how she gets about these things. But everything's coming together. We're just about to head out for brunch before finishing the last touches at the venue. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. She was lying effortlessly, like it was second nature. That sounds nice, I said, barely able to keep the venom out of my voice. Make sure to tell Sarah I said hi. Will do. Love you, babe. She hung up before I could respond, and I stared at the phone like it might explode in my hand. I pulled up the app connected to the listening device. There were no live sounds, but the recorded snippets from the night before were waiting. With a deep breath, I pressed play. At first, the muffled voices were hard to make out. But as the recording went on, the conversation became clearer. Derek's voice came first, low and teasing. I still can't believe you're here. It's been how long? 8 years since we were together. Emily laughed softly, Something like that. Feels longer, honestly. But it's nice to reconnect. There was a pause, the kind that made my skin crawl. You think Jason has any idea? Derek asked, his voice dripping with smug confidence. Emily snorted. Please. Jason's sweet, but he's predictable. He'd never suspect a thing. I mean, look at last night. I packed lingerie right in front of him, and he didn't even blink. My stomach dropped. She'd been mocking me, right under my own roof. The recording continued, their voices dipping lower, more intimate. I stopped the playback, my hand shaking too hard to hold the phone steady. I didn't need to hear any more to know exactly what had happened. I wanted to scream, to punch something, but instead, I sat there in silence, my mind churning. I couldn't confront her yet, not without a plan. If she was this comfortable lying to my face, she'd find a way to spin it, to gaslight me into questioning my own reality. No, this time I needed to play her game. By the time she came home that evening, I'd wiped every trace of my anger from my face. I greeted her at the door with a warm smile, even taking her suitcase to carry inside. How was the wedding? I asked as she kicked off her shoes and stretched, looking every bit the exhausted but content wife. Oh, it was beautiful, she said, running her fingers through her hair. Sarah was glowing, and the venue was perfect. You would have loved it. She was lying so smoothly it almost made me laugh. As we sat on the couch later that evening, her phone buzzed with a text. She picked it up quickly, her eyes flicking over the screen before she set it back down. Face down. Who was that? I asked casually. Just Sarah. Thanking me for all the help, she said, not missing a beat. I nodded, watching her closely. She thought she was so clever, so untouchable. But I had her, and now it was my turn to decide how this game was going to end. The next few days were a test of patience. Every time Emily smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodnight, every time she acted like the devoted wife, it took everything in me not to snap. But I held back. I needed her to feel safe, to think she'd gotten away with it. That's the thing about liars, they get comfortable. And when they get comfortable, they slip up. It didn't take long. 3 days after she came back from her wedding weekend, I was in the kitchen pouring myself a cup of coffee when Emily strolled in, phone in hand. She was texting someone. Her face lit up with that same glow I'd seen before. The glow that wasn't for me. Who's got you smiling so much this morning? I asked, keeping my tone light. She barely looked up. Oh, just Sarah. She's already planning her honeymoon photos. Sarah was already on her honeymoon? Interesting, considering Emily had claimed to have a text exchange with her the night before. Oh, that's nice, I said, hiding the smirk threatening to break through. Where'd she and Ben go again? Emily froze, her fingers hovering over the screen for just a second too long. Italy, she said quickly, slipping the phone into her pocket. Yeah, they've always wanted to see the Amalfi Coast. That would have been convincing if Sarah hadn't posted on Instagram 2 hours earlier, tagging herself in Cancun. Sounds amazing, I said, taking a sip of coffee. We should go somewhere like that someday. Maybe a second honeymoon? Emily laughed nervously, brushing past me to grab a mug. Yeah, maybe. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, I caught a glimpse of the screen. The name D flashed briefly before she turned it away, her thumb darting across the keyboard. Derek. The coffee cup in my hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to grab her phone, to demand an explanation, but I stayed calm. I leaned against the counter, watching her. You seem busy this morning. Work stuff. She glanced up, startled. Oh yeah, just some last-minute projects. You know how it is. I nodded, my mind already spinning. She'd left her laptop on the dining table again, open and unlocked. She never learned. After breakfast, Emily grabbed her gym bag and kissed me on the cheek. I'll be back in a couple of hours, she said, heading for the door. The second it closed, I moved. Her laptop was exactly where she'd left it, and I didn't waste any time. I pulled up her messages, scanning for anything suspicious. Most of it was mundane, emails from work, group chats with her friends, but then I found the folder. It was buried deep, labeled innocuously as receipts. I almost skipped over it, but something about the last modified date caught my eye. I opened it and there it was. Screenshots of text messages. Flights booked under her maiden name. Photos, grainy, hastily snapped, of her and Derek together. One in particular made my stomach turn. Emily and Derek sitting on a couch, her head resting on his shoulder, a wine glass in her hand. She looked content, happy, a happiness I hadn't seen in her eyes for years. The timestamps didn't lie. These weren't from years ago. They were recent. I copied everything onto a flash drive, my hands shaking as I worked. I didn't know what my endgame was yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her keep lying to my face. When Emily came home later, sweaty from her workout and acting like nothing had changed, I almost laughed. She had no idea the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. For the rest of the evening, I played the perfect husband, helping with dinner, asking about her day, even watching her favorite show with her. But inside, I was already planning my next move. She thought she could keep playing me, but the game was over. She just didn't know it yet.by the next day. I knew I had to push Emily. Let her think she was still in control while I laid my trap. Over breakfast, I kept the conversation light, acting like the oblivious husband she believed me to be. But as she stood to clear her plate, I dropped the bait. "Oh, by the way," I said casually, "we got an invitation to Ethan and Lily's dinner party this Saturday." Emily froze mid-step, her back to me. "This Saturday?" "Yeah," I said, stirring my coffee. "It's been a while since we've done anything as a couple. Thought it might be nice to go together." She turned around, her face carefully neutral. I think I already made plans for Saturday. Didn't I tell you?" "Nope," I said, my tone light but pointed. "What plans?" Emily hesitated, her hands fiddling with the dish towel. "It's just a girls' night with Sarah and the bridesmaids. You know, a little post-wedding catch-up." A lie. Another blatant, obvious lie. "Oh," I said, pretending to consider it. "That's too bad. I was really looking forward to us going together. But if you're busy, I'll just go solo." Her expression faltered for a split second before she quickly recovered. "I mean, if you really want me to go, I can try to reschedule." No, I said, waving her off. "You've had these plans for a while. I wouldn't want to mess them up." Emily smiled, relieved. "Thanks, babe. You're the best." She kissed me on the cheek before heading upstairs, and I sat there, gripping my coffee mug so tightly I thought it might shatter. I knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't going to Sarah's. She was going to see Derek. And this time I was going to catch her in the act. The setup. That afternoon I called Ethan. "Hey man," I said, "do me a favor. Can you invite Emily and me to a dinner party this Saturday? Doesn't have to be real. Just make it sound convincing." Ethan was confused but agreed without asking too many questions. He called Emily later that day, confirming the fake invite. When she brought it up at dinner, I acted surprised but supportive, telling her I understood if she couldn't make it because of her plans. Her smile was too wide, her reassurance too eager. "I'm so sorry, Jason. I'll make it up to you, I promise." "Yeah," I thought bitterly. "You will." Saturday night. On Saturday, Emily left around 6 p.m., dressed in a casual outfit that screamed, low effort. Sweatpants, a hoodie, no makeup.
A total disguisa.
I knew better. As soon as her car was out of sight, I grabbed my keys and followed her. It wasn't hard to tail her. She wasn't expecting anyone to be watching. Sure enough, she didn't go anywhere near Sarah's house. She drove straight to Derek's. I parked down the street, watching as she got out of the car. This time, she wasn't wearing the sweatpants anymore. She changed into a sleek black dress that hugged her in all the ways I used to admire. She pulled a small bag out of the car, the lingerie, probably, and walked to Derek's front door. He opened it before she even knocked, pulling her inside like she was the only person in the world. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest burned with rage, betrayal, and humiliation, but I didn't move. Not yet. I waited an hour, long enough for my fury to simmer into cold calculation. Then I stepped out of the car, walked up to Derek's door, and knocked. I heard voices inside, her laugh, his low murmurs, and then the sound of footsteps. When Derek opened the door and saw me standing there, his smug expression vanished. "Jason," he said, his voice tight, "what are you doing here?" Before he could close the door, I shoved it open and stepped inside. Emily appeared in the hallway, her face pale as a sheet. She was holding a glass of wine, her perfect mask of confidence cracking as her eyes darted between me and Derek. "Jason," she stammered, her voice trembling. "What are you? Funny?" I said, my voice low and cold. "I could ask you the same thing, Emily." She froze, the color draining from her face. "I thought you were with Sarah tonight," I continued, stepping further into the house. "But it looks like you had other plans." The silence in the room was deafening. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Derek, ever the coward, stepped back, his hands raised like he wanted no part of this. "I think I'll let you two talk." He started retreating toward the kitchen, but I wasn't done yet. "No," I snapped, my eyes locking onto his. "You stay. We're all going to talk." Emily's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. She flinched, but I didn't. This was it, the moment of truth, and I wasn't leaving until I got answers. The silence that followed could have cut glass. Emily stood frozen in the hallway, her face pale and her eyes wide, darting between Derek and me. Derek, for his part, looked like a deer caught in headlights. His cowardice only fueled my rage. "Jason, I can explain," Emily said finally, her voice trembling. "Explain," I said, my tone sharp and biting. "Sure, Emily. I'd love to hear an explanation for why my wife is sneaking around with her ex-husband while lying to my face." Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right words, but nothing came out. Derek cleared his throat, trying to regain some control of the situation. "Look, man, this isn't what it looks like." I turned on him, my eyes narrowing. "Then by all means enlighten me. What is this, Derek? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like my wife betraying me with the guy she swore she was over." Derek took a step back, his hands raised defensively. "It's complicated. Complicated," I barked, my voice rising. "You know what's complicated? Fixing this mess of a marriage while you've been skulking around like a cockroach." Emily flinched at my words, but I didn't care. "Jason, please," she said, stepping toward me. "This isn't what you think. Derek and we were just catching up." I laughed, a cold, bitter sound that echoed through the house. "Catching up? Spare me, Emily. I have the texts, the screenshots, the lingerie you packed like some trophy for him. Do you think I'm an idiot?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying. But then, like a switch flipped, her expression hardened. "So what if I was seeing him?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You think this is all my fault? Do you even realize how miserable you've made me? How long I've felt trapped in this boring, predictable life you've built?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't back down. "Miserable? Trapped? You could have told me, Emily. We could have worked through it. But no, you decided to sneak around and humiliate me instead." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Worked through it? You've been checked out for years, Jason, always busy with your projects, your routines, never paying attention to what I want." Derek, he listened to me. He made me feel alive again. "Alive?" I spat. "That's what you call betraying your husband? Sneaking behind his back with your ex-husband of all people? Is this what being alive means to you?" Derek finally found his voice, stepping forward slightly. "Hey, man, I think you should calm down." I turned on him, my voice cutting like steel. "Shut your mouth, Derek. You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" Couldn't stand that she moved on, so you wormed your way back in. "Jason, stop it," Emily shouted. "This isn't just on him. I made this choice." I turned back to her, my chest heaving with anger and heartbreak. "Yeah, you made a choice, and that choice destroyed everything we built. I hope he's worth it, Emily, because after this, there's no coming back." For the first time, she faltered, the weight of her actions sinking in. "Jason, Her voice broke, but I didn't wait to hear the rest. I turned on my heel and walked out the door, leaving her standing there in the ruins of what she'd done. As I got into my car and drove away, the reality of it all finally hit me. The anger gave way to something colder, emptier. This wasn't just the end of trust or love. It was the end of us. And for the first time in years, I realized that might be for the best. I didn't go home that night. Couldn't. The thought of walking back into the house we'd shared, the same place Emily had been so comfortable lying to me, made my stomach churn. Instead, I drove aimlessly for hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. Around midnight, I parked in a dark, empty lot and leaned back in the seat, staring at the roof of my car. The numbness had started to set in, but beneath it, there was a fire smoldering. A mixture of betrayal, disbelief, and something I couldn't quite name yet. By 2 a.m., I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable. I had to start putting my life back together, and it started with taking control of the situation. I needed a plan not just for me, but for what came next. Step 1. Calling the lawyer. The next morning, I made the first call. "David," I said when he picked up, his voice groggy but professional. "I need your help." David was an old friend who'd handled a few legal matters for me in the past. Divorce wasn't his specialty, but I trusted him to point me in the right direction. "You're sure about this?" he asked after I gave him a brief rundown. "Positive," I said, my voice flat. "She's already made her choice. Now it's time for me to make mine." David gave me the name of a divorce attorney who came highly recommended. I saved the number in my phone but didn't call just yet. First, I needed to make sure all my ducks were in a row. Step 2. Securing the evidence. The flash drive I'd copied Emily's messages onto was burning a hole in my pocket. I spent hours combing through everything, organizing it into folders labeled by date and content. I didn't just want proof, I wanted a bulletproof case. Photos, texts, the recording from the bug at Derek's house, I had it all. The evidence painted a damning picture of Emily's deceit, and though it hurt to see it laid out so plainly, it also gave me a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't my failure. This was hers. Step 3. Confronting the truth. By the time I got home that evening, Emily was waiting for me. She was sitting on the couch, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy. "Jason," she started as soon as I walked through the door. "Please, we need to talk." I dropped my keys on the counter and looked at her, my expression unreadable. "Talk? Now you want to talk?" She flinched at the coldness in my voice but pushed on. "I'm sorry, okay? I messed up. I don't even know how it got this far." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "That's funny because from where I'm standing, it looks like you knew exactly what you were doing. You didn't mess up, Emily. You made deliberate choices, over and over again." Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't move me. "Not this time. Jason, it wasn't." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Don't tell me it wasn't serious. Don't tell me it didn't mean anything. I heard you. I saw the messages. I know everything." Her mouth snapped shut, her tears spilling over as she shook her head. "I was stupid. I thought I wanted something different, but I didn't think about what I was throwing away." I laughed bitterly. "Throwing away? You didn't just throw us away, Emily. You set us on fire and danced in the ashes." The weight of my words hit her hard, and she broke down, sobbing into her hands. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not after what she'd done. "I can't do this anymore," I said finally, my voice hollow. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. We're done, Emily." Her head shot up, her face streaked with tears. "Jason, please." "No," I said firmly, cutting her off. "There's nothing left to say. I'll be staying in the guest room until I figure out the next steps. And I suggest you start thinking about what you want, too, because this marriage, it's over." She cried harder, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked upstairs, closed the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of calm. The hardest part was done. Now it was just a matter of moving forward. And this time, I wouldn't be looking back. I spent the next few days carefully navigating life under the same roof as Emily. We barely spoke, the air between us heavy with tension. She looked like a shadow of herself, moving around the house quietly, her usual confidence shattered. But I didn't trust the quiet. My suspicions were confirmed when Derek inserted himself back into the picture. It started with a voicemail left on my phone. "Jason, this is Derek. Look, man, I think we need to talk. Whatever's going on between you and Emily, it doesn't have to get ugly. I know this is hard, but let's be adults about it. I deleted it immediately, disgusted by his smug tone. Let's be adults? Coming from the man who'd snuck around with my wife that was rich. The next day, I came home from running errands to find Derek's car parked outside my house. My pulse spiked as I slammed the car door and marched up the driveway. Inside, I found him sitting on the couch with Emily, his posture relaxed, his smug smile firmly in place. What the hell is he doing here? I demanded, my voice echoing through the living room. Emily shot to her feet, her face panicked. Jason, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. I snapped, my eyes locking onto Derek. You have 5 seconds to explain why you're in my house before I throw you out. Derek raised his hands in mock surrender, his smirk never wavering. I'm just here to help, man. Emily asked me to come over so we could talk things through. She thought maybe I could. Help! I cut him off, my voice dripping with venom. You think you're going to help fix this? You're the reason we're here in the first place, Derek. Emily stepped between us, her hands up in a placating gesture. Jason, stop. He's just here to mediate. We need to figure out what's next. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. What's next? What's next is you pack your things and get out of my house. Both of you. Don't be so dramatic, Derek said, his voice annoyingly calm. You're hurt. I get it, but Emily and I. You don't get a damn thing, I growled, taking a step toward him. You walked into my marriage and destroyed it. Don't you dare stand there and act like you're the reasonable one. For the first time, Derek's composure faltered. Look, I didn't mean for this to happen. Oh, spare me the excuses, I snapped. You've been waiting for this since the day she left you, haven't you? Watching from the sidelines, waiting for a chance to swoop back in. Jason, stop, Emily shouted, her voice breaking. This isn't helping. I turned to her, my anger boiling over. You brought him here, Emily. You let him into our house after everything you've done. And now you expect me to sit here and listen to him? No, I'm done. The room went silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. You have until the end of the week to move out, I said, my voice cold and final. Both of you. I'll be filing for divorce on Monday. Emily's face crumpled, but I didn't care. Derek looked like he wanted to argue, but one look at me made him think better of it. I walked upstairs, slamming the door behind me. This wasn't the way I wanted things to end, but at least now I was done pretending. Emily and Derek could have each other. I didn't care anymore. Let them deal with the wreckage they'd created. The days leading up to the end of the week were a toxic mix of silence, tension, and passive-aggressive avoidance. Emily barely spoke to me, her face etched with guilt and defiance in equal measure. Derek, thankfully, kept his distance after our confrontation, but the knowledge that he was lurking in the background was enough to keep my blood boiling. Then came Friday night, the final straw. I was upstairs packing a bag to stay with a friend for a few days. I couldn't stomach another night under the same roof as Emily. When I heard her on the phone downstairs, her voice was hushed, hurried, but not careful enough. I don't know, Derek, she said, frustration lacing her tone. He's not budging. He's serious about the divorce. I froze, my hand gripping the zipper of my duffel bag. Yes, I know I screwed up, but I didn't think he'd actually go through with it. No, he doesn't know about the money. I didn't tell him. The money? My heart stopped. What money? I crept to the top of the stairs, straining to hear more. Of course I'm sure. He hasn't even noticed the withdrawals, she hissed. Derek, calm down. Once the divorce is finalized, I'll figure it out. He's not going to look that closely. A cold wave of realization washed over me. She's stealing from me. I turned and walked back to the bedroom, my movements slow and deliberate. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. All this time, while I'd been trying to piece together the fragments of our shattered marriage, she'd been siphoning money from our joint account. For him. For Derek. Anger didn't even begin to cover what I felt. This wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated, calculated theft. I grabbed my laptop and logged into our bank account. Sure enough, the evidence was all there. Multiple transfers over the past 3 months, each one small enough to avoid immediate suspicion but adding up to thousands. My hands trembled as I took screenshots of everything, saving them to the same folder where I'd stored the evidence of her affair. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was fraud. The confrontation. I didn't wait until morning. I stormed downstairs, my laptop in hand, and found Emily pacing the living room with her phone still in her hand. She looked up, startled, as I approached. "Jason, save it!" I snapped, slamming the laptop onto the coffee table. The screen displayed the bank transfers in all their damning detail. Her face went white. "What's this, Emily?" I demanded, my voice cold and steady. "Care to explain why thousands of dollars are missing from our account?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Let me guess," I continued, leaning in closer. "It's not what it looks like? Or maybe you thought I was too clueless to notice." Her hands shook as she set her phone down. "Jason, I
kan explain.
"Oh, I'm sure you can," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Go ahead. Explain why my money has been funneled out of our account and into God knows what." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not this time. "It wasn't like that," she said weakly. I needed the money for
the ache?
I cut her off, my voice rising. "For him." She flinched, tears spilling over. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, Jason. I didn't mean for it to get so out of control." "Out of control?" I barked. "Emily, you're a thief. You stole from me, from us. Do you have any idea how serious this is?" "I was desperate," she cried. "I didn't know what else to do." "Desperate for what?" I demanded. "To fund your little affair? To help Derek with whatever pathetic mess he's gotten himself into?" She didn't answer, her silence speaking volumes. I straightened, my voice cold and final. "This isn't just divorce anymore, Emily. This is theft. And I'm not letting you get away with it." Her eyes widened in panic. "Jason, please, don't do this. I'll pay it back, I swear. Just don't go to the police." I stared at her, the woman I once loved reduced to this. A liar, a thief, a stranger. "You have until tomorrow to move out," I said. "After that, I'm freezing the accounts and contacting my lawyer. If you try to take another cent, I will press charges." She sobbed as I turned and walked away, my resolve unshakable. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. This was the end of the person I thought I knew. And for the first time, I felt no sadness, only relief. The next morning, I woke early. There was no time to waste. The loose ends of my unraveling life needed tying up. I had given Emily an ultimatum, but I didn't trust her to honor it. She'd lied, cheated, and stolen. There was no line she wouldn't cross. First, I called the bank. "Good morning. This is Jason Harper," I said, masking the exhaustion in my voice. "I need to freeze my joint account and transfer the remaining balance into a new, sole account under my name. Immediately." The representative asked a few questions, her voice professional but curious. I didn't explain. It wasn't her business. Within 15 minutes, the account was secured, and I had complete control of our finances. Next, I called my lawyer. "David," I said as soon as he answered, "I'm filing today. I have the evidence you mentioned, infidelity, financial misconduct, everything. How fast can we move?" David didn't mince words. "With what you've got. Fast. I'll file the paperwork this afternoon." Once she's served, any attempt to access your assets or hide evidence will only strengthen your case. I thanked him, hung up, and felt a flicker of satisfaction. Emily thought she could outsmart me. She thought I'd roll over and let her take everything without a fight. But I wasn't clueless anymore. Emily's desperation. By the time I went downstairs, Emily was already awake, pacing the living room with a look of pure desperation on her face. She had 2 suitcases by the door, but I knew she wasn't leaving voluntarily. "Good morning," I said, my tone icy. She spun around, her eyes bloodshot from crying. "Jason, we need to talk." "No, Emily," I said, crossing my arms. "You need to pack. You have until noon to be out of this house." She walked toward me, hands clasped like she was begging. "Jason, please. I know I screwed up, but we can fix this. I can fix this." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Fix this? You think this is fixable? After the lying, the affair, the theft? There's nothing left to fix, Emily. You burned it all to the ground." She broke down, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was confused, lost. Derek, he made me feel alive again. Alive! I snapped, my voice rising. You felt alive by stealing from your husband and crawling back to your ex? That's not confusion, Emily. That's selfishness.
Pur and simple.
Her tears turned to anger. And you weren't exactly innocent in all this, Jason. You ignored me for years, buried yourself in work, treated me like an afterthought. I stepped closer, my jaw clenched. If I ignored you, it's because I was busy keeping our lives together. I was working so we could have a future, while you were out playing house with Derek. She shrank back, the weight of my words hitting her like a slap. For a moment, the room was silent except for her muffled sobs. You've made your choices, I said finally, my voice cold. Now it's time to live with the consequences. The final blow. At 11:30 a.m., a knock at the door shattered the silence. I opened it to find a server holding a thick envelope. Jason Harper? He asked. I nodded, taking the envelope and closing the door before Emily could see. I walked into the kitchen, opened it, and skimmed the contents. Divorce papers, official and undeniable. When I returned to the living room, Emily was sitting on the couch, her head in her hands. I tossed the papers onto the coffee table, the sound making her jump. What's this? She asked, her voice shaking. It's over, Emily, I said, my tone resolute. Sign the papers. If you fight me on this, I'll make sure every ugly detail comes out in court. The affair, the theft, everything. Do you really want Derek to see the inside of a courtroom because of you? Her eyes filled with fresh tears as she stared at the papers. Jason, please. No more begging, Emily, I said, cutting her off. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. She didn't argue this time. Instead, she slumped back into the couch, defeated. At exactly noon, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Derek had arrived to pick her up. You should go, I said, motioning toward the door. Emily hesitated, looking like she wanted to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned my back and walked upstairs, leaving her to deal with the mess she'd created. From the window, I watched as Derek loaded her suitcases into his car. She hesitated on the porch for a moment, glancing back at the house, but I didn't move. When they finally drove away, a wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in weeks, the house was silent, peaceful, and for the first time in years, I felt free. When the sound of Derek's car disappeared down the street, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space in front of me. Emily was gone, physically at least, but the wreckage she'd left behind was everywhere. In my home, my bank account, and my heart. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet settle around me. It felt foreign, almost oppressive, but there was no turning back now. This was my life, fractured but mine to rebuild. I picked up the divorce papers she had left and signed on the coffee table. Typical. She couldn't even face the end of our marriage with dignity. No matter, I'd expected this. My lawyer had already prepared for her resistance, and I wasn't about to let her stall my life any longer. I called David and explained the situation. He assured me that we could proceed without her cooperation. The words gave me some comfort, but there was still a long road ahead. The aftermath of discovery. That afternoon, I began the process of reclaiming my home. I gathered everything that reminded me of Emily. The photos, the trinkets, the little notes she'd once left for me, and boxed them up. The weight of each item was unbearable. A reminder of how much of myself I'd given to someone who'd tossed it all away. I set the boxes in the garage, out of sight and out of mind. Her side of the closet was next. As I pulled down her clothes, perfumes, and accessories, I stumbled upon something tucked behind a row of dresses she'd left behind. A small shoebox. Curious, I opened it, only to find an envelope stuffed with cash and receipts. The receipts were for various things she'd bought over the past few months. Hotel stays, expensive dinners, and even jewelry. For Derek. My jaw tightened as I sifted through the evidence. It was more than I needed for the case, but it also felt like another knife in the back. She'd stolen from me, lied to me, and now I realized she'd used me to bankroll her fantasy life with him. I snapped pictures of everything, logged the contents, and sealed the box. This wasn't just proof anymore. This was fuel for my resolve. A visit from Derek. The next morning, I was outside cleaning the garage when Derek's silver sedan pulled into the driveway. My chest tightened as he stepped out, his smug expression replaced by one of caution. "What do you want?" I asked, not bothering to hide my disdain. Derek raised his hands in a show of fake peace. "I'm not here to fight, Jason. I thought we should talk." I dropped the box I was holding onto the workbench and turned to face him fully. "Talk? About what?" "How you and Emily lied, cheated, and stole from me." He flinched but didn't back down. "Look, I know we messed up, but Emily's not handling this well. I cut him off with a bitter laugh. "Oh, she's not handling it well? That's rich coming from the guy who waltzed into my marriage and helped himself to my wife." Derek took a step closer, his voice softening. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this, Jason. I swear. I care about Emily, but I never wanted to hurt you." "Save it," I snapped, my anger flaring. "You've done enough damage. If you cared about anything other than yourself, you'd have stayed out of my life in the first place." For a moment, Derek seemed at a loss for words. Then he nodded, his face grim. "Fine. I just wanted to clear the air. But for what it's worth, I hope you find peace in all this." I stared at him, my chest tight with fury and disbelief. "You want to give me peace? Sign the papers with her and stay out of my life." Without waiting for a response, I walked back inside, slamming the door behind me. The small victories. Later that evening, I sat at the dining table with a beer in hand, the divorce papers spread out before me. It still felt surreal. This was the woman I'd loved, the person I'd built a life with, and yet, this was where we'd ended up. But as the hours passed and the anger subsided, I realized something. I wasn't broken. Betrayed, yes. Angry, absolutely. But I was still standing, still moving forward. That night, I emailed David to push the case forward, attaching all the new evidence I'd found. I wasn't going to let Emily or Derek drag me down any further. This was my life, and for the first time in a long time, I was determined to live it on my terms. A month passed, and the dust had finally begun to settle. The divorce papers were filed, my accounts were secured, and Emily had moved out for good. True to her nature, she tried to stall, leaving me with voicemail after voicemail, alternating between tearful apologies and spiteful accusations. But I ignored them all. I had nothing left to say to her. The court proceedings were swift, thanks to the mountain of evidence I'd gathered. The lawyer made sure Emily had no leverage, especially with her financial misdeeds. In the end, she signed the papers with little resistance, probably under pressure from Derek. I didn't care anymore. I'd won, and that was all that mattered. The closure. One afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Emily. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need to talk to you. Please, just one conversation." I stared at the message for a long moment, my emotions twisting. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let her fade into the past where she belonged. But another part, the part that had loved her once, wanted answers. Closure. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. When I walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked thinner, her face tired, her usual confidence replaced by something more fragile. "Jason," she said, standing awkwardly. I nodded and sat across from her. "You wanted to talk. So talk." She fidgeted with her cup, her eyes downcast. "I don't even know where to start," she said softly. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "You've said that before, Emily. What's different this time?" Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in months, I saw something genuine in them. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even think I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I've been seeing a therapist, trying to figure out why I ruined everything." I didn't respond immediately, letting her words hang in the air. "I loved you," she continued, her voice trembling. "I really did. But somewhere along the way I lost myself. And instead of trying to fix things with you, I ran to Derek because it felt easy, familiar. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake." I sighed, my anger dull but still present. "Emily, I'm glad you're working on yourself. But the truth is, I don't care about your reasons anymore. What you did, what you and Derek did, it broke something in me. Something I can't fix. Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. I understand. We sat in silence for a moment before I stood. I hope you figure out whatever it is you're looking for, Emily, but I'm done. Take care of yourself. I walked out without looking back, a strange mix of sadness and relief washing over me. The first steps forward. In the weeks that followed, life began to feel lighter. The house, once filled with tension and lies, felt like a sanctuary again. I started rebuilding both the physical space and my own sense of self. I reconnected with old friends, throwing myself into hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage. For the first time in years, I felt free to live without the weight of someone else's deceit. One evening, while out with friends, I met someone new. Her name was Claire, and she had a smile that lit up the entire room. We talked for hours, laughing about everything and nothing. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people enjoying each other's company. As I drove home that night, I realized something profound. Emily's betrayal hadn't destroyed me. It had broken me, yes, but in the breaking, it had forced me to rebuild stronger, smarter, and more self-aware. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. Final reflections. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that betrayal doesn't define you. It tests you, breaks you down, but it also gives you a choice. To let it consume you or to rise above it. I chose to rise. To anyone reading this, dealing with the fallout of lies, heartbreak, or betrayal, know this, you're stronger than you think. It's going to hurt. It's going to feel impossible. But one day you'll look back and realize it didn't end you, freed you, and that freedom, that's worth everything.